order people who have a lot of questions.
Okay, and when are you
I
taking
never gave
questions?
people
What
a stop
are you
time.
taking? Okay.
But as I had mentioned to you, that usually our lectures are like an hour. What?
Yeah, the wonders of the internet.
I know. Yeah.
It never ends. Just goes on and on and on. It's busy out there today.
I'm hearing a lot of siren.
Yeah, it's obviously a busy day today. The criminals are out there making money.
So we're live. Oh, give me that control. Oh, Kelly, can give me control back at the Zoom. You know,
I'm not sure if I can, but I shall try.
I'm not sure.
Which one are you, host?
Yes, I think it's host. Yes.
Do you know how I give you back control? I'm clicking on your name.
Hold on, you got it? Hold on, here it is.
Okay.
We're ready? Whenever we're ready. Whenever we're ready, we can start. Whenever we're ready. Okay. People are logging in. So, Ruel, I'll just hold up the comb cases. Yeah. Okay. All right, we can start. Ready, Kelly? Better? Ready. Welcome, everyone, to National Museum Jamaica's annual Heritage Lecture that takes place every October. And today we have Kelly Foster, all the way from England, aka foreign, who was gracious enough, despite the time difference and the daylight savings, to join us today. And we thank her so much. Now, to kickstart off the lecture, because it is about heraldry, I wanted to show you in our collection some of the earliest incarnations of Jamaica's heraldic shield. So, I know it's kind of off camera. All right, let's see. Hold it up. Ooh, lighting. Let me show you guys. Don't know is it clear? Ooh, is it fuzzy? How is that? Perfect. Back more. Ooh. Sorry, guys, it has to focus this way. Ooh. Down. Hold on, guys. This is tortoiseshell, and it is from 1690. So it's very old, very delicate, and the lights are glaring off it. So we're trying our best to show it live. Hold on, I have to cover it. Tilt it down. Sorry, our technical extraordinaire is trying to help me. Better? To this side. Oh, the light is good? Okay. I don't know if, Kelly, can you see it?
It looks wonderful.
Okay, great. So on it is the native crocodile on top, resting on a log, the St. George's cross, and inside are pineapples, 2 tainos on side by side, and the English imperial helmet. Now, this particular tortoiseshell was made as a gift. So it has other decorations, the person's name. Yeah, and even on the back, it has other heraldic symbols, probably of the person's house. You guys can see it clearly. And other fruit trees, cashew, cocoa, coconut. And then another example, which is actually earlier, is from 1682. Can you see it? Oh, I'm trying to focus camera. And it looks, as you can see, a little different. I mean, the design, the helmet, the 2 tainos, the crocodile. Yeah, so these were all handmade, of course, in the time. And so, yeah, just wanted to show you guys these live, despite the glare. All right. Now, if you guys want to see the later on, we'll try our best to show them. And so, that being said, we want to now make Kelly start her presentation. And thanks again, everyone, for joining.
I'm not sure if you can all see me, but thank you so much, Alexis. It was fantastic to see the combs. I hadn't realized that they were so big, see them in the flesh. And it's a huge honor to be invited to give this talk. And hopefully I'll be expanding a little bit on kind of what we know and what we think we know, both about the heraldry that I come across locally living in London and how that links to the coat of arms of Jamaica. So we're going to be talking about both those things. So thank you so much, Alexis, and the entire team at the National Museum of Jamaica. So I'll start to share my screen. Okay, so sharing my screen now. And for many, kind of, what is heraldry? For many, heraldry is directly linked to European warfare and European arms. And heraldry is spoken about as being both a science and an art. And this is kind of how you see heraldry depicted, generally speaking. On the right-hand side, you've got a kind of romantic knight in shining armor on a white steed, holding his shield, which is this thing here, and then a 21st century reinterpretation of that. And the heraldry, the term coat of arms actually means or originated in this yellow garment this gentleman in Tuscany is wearing, which was basically a garment that had the symbol that you could identify the knight on. And that symbol was oftentimes the same symbol that was on his shield. So you've got various elements of a coat of arms. You've got the helm. We heard Alexis there speak about the helm, the helmet that is on top of the Jamaican coat of arms, and it actually refers to a helmet. You've got the crest. So in the case of the Jamaican coat of arms, the crest was, I usually call it an alligator, but it was a crocodile, as the native crocodile, as Alexis said. And then the charge, in the case of the guy in yellow here, is this black eagle. But coats of arms aren't only to do with the medieval period, they also have contemporary significance. This was on my radar last year when Kanye West did his pop-up concert in Kingston and started a huge controversy about his use of the Jamaican coat of arms and whether it was an appropriate thing for this American entertainer to be using and selling merchandise with the Jamaican coat of arms. And coats of arms are equally as important today. I know that it's National Heritage Month in Jamaica, and there have been lots of conversations about the national hero, who should be commemorated as a national hero, and what does it mean to live with the realities of a colonial or a colonized past. In Europe, there are similar conversations about how enslavement, imperialism, and colonialism is depicted, and on the heraldry that you see, or that I see all around myself as I go around London. So here are some examples. Harvard Law School has cancelled or stopped using the coat of arms that it used because it was the coat of arms of a slave owner in Antigua. Imperial College in London, which is a university in London, has taken the imperial motto out of its coat of arms, and at the bottom there is a coat of arms in Scotland that had enslaved Africans actually on the coat of arms, and they've stopped using that earlier on this year. So in my talk, I'm going to be concentrating on the coats of arms, these two coats of arms. On the right-hand side, hopefully you recognize the coat of arms of Jamaica. And this is a version from 1962 from independence. And on the left-hand side, we've got the coat of arms of Archbishop William Jackson. And this is a coat of arms that I would see quite often because I see it when I'm on my way home, when I'm traveling over the River Thames on the top of a double-decker bus. And I see it on top of the weather vane of Lambeth Palace. And if you can probably tell, the coat of arms of Archbishop William Jackson includes four Africans, four blackamoors heads. So what I'm encouraging us to think about is how heraldry that is still in use today depicts colonialism, depicts enslaved Africans as well. So that's what the focus of the talk is going to be. So this is where I live. I live in the London borough of Lambeth, which is here coloured in red on this map of London. And Lambeth Palace is about up here. It backs onto the River Thames, and I live 5-minute walk from there. I'm just a few minutes away from the River Thames. But the neighbourhood And I should say the introduction to my coat of art, to my interest in heraldry, came from my grandmother's dining room wall. My grandmother, all my grandparents are from Jamaica, and they came to the UK in the 1950s. And like many people who travelled, who immigrated from Jamaica in the 1950s, who settled abroad, when Independence Day happened, many of them proudly displayed the souvenirs of Jamaican independence. And in this case, in my grandmother's case, it was a scroll that included the coat of arms with this new motto that was adopted in 1962, out of many, one people. So that was kind of where I became familiar with coats of arms. But actually, all around me in Lambeth, there are coats of arms. These are just some examples on my street where I live. So we've got two schools in the bottom left and the top right corner, St. Anne's School and St. Mark's. Each of them feature a coat of arms. I live right around the corner from the Oval, the cricket ground, Kennington Oval. They also feature the coat of arms, and in this case with the 3 feathers of the Prince of Wales, because the Prince of Wales owns a lot of land where I live. And then my neighbour also displays his coat of arms, his personal family coat of arms, on a flagpole that is on top of his house. But because Lambeth is the place where Lambeth Palace is, the London Borough of Lambeth is where Lambeth Palace, the location of Lambeth Palace, there are lots of heraldry that depict Lambeth Palace and Lambeth Palace's connection to the Archbishop of Canterbury. In this case, we've here got the coat of arms on the left-hand side of a school that's a couple of minutes up the road from me, Archbishop Tennyson, named after the Archbishop of Canterbury, and the coat of arms of the London Borough of Lambeth, which includes in the middle a mace and a mitre, because and here are another 2 examples, more school children from Archbishop Tennyson's, and a street sign with the coat of arms of Lambeth. And it's all over. You can see this is the front door to Lambeth Town Hall, and above the door again is the coat of arms of the London Borough of Lambeth, and at the back of the town hall is this 1930s sculpture, and it's showing at the bottom there 2 symbols which are synonymous with Lambeth, because they are also the symbols that are most often used in the heraldry of the bishops of the Church of England. And they are the mitre, the bishop's hat, and what's called a crozier, a bishop's staff. And you can see 2 examples of a crozier down here. As an aside, I was just speaking to Alexis about October and the season of emancipation that you commemorate in Jamaica from August 1st. And I wanted to show you a little bit of how we marked August 1st this year in Lambeth in Brixton. On Emancipation Day for the past 7 years, I think, there has been a march to demand reparations. It's called a Stop the Manganese March. This year, it was, despite COVID restrictions, it was even more prominent. And Lambeth is one of, I think was the first this year actually, civic government to agree a motion in the council to support the reparations movement. So I think that's an important thing to mention. But this is Lambeth Palace. The River Thames is just there to the left-hand side that we can barely see. The red brick there is part of the oldest part of Lambeth Palace. And Lambeth Palace is the home and the London residence of the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop of Canterbury isn't the head of the Church of England. That's the Queen, the monarch, but he is the spiritual leader of the Church of England and the primate of the Anglican Communion. And there are a couple of examples of how heraldry is really an integral part of the Church of England in the UK. On the left-hand side, you've got the Dean and the Bishop of the Southwark Cathedral. And on the right-hand side, you've actually got the Christchurch Gate in Canterbury, which is a city in Kent where Canterbury Cathedral is. And you can see above the doorway are all the coats of arms of the Archbishop of Canterbury. And these are some examples of the coats of arms of all of the dioceses in the UK. The 2 examples that I'm going to point out to you are the Archbishop of Canterbury's coat of arms with this white Y shape, which is called a pallium. You can see up here. and then also the coat of arms of the Diocese of London as well, which are two crossed swords.
You're watching now.
And I wanted to give you an example of the coat of arms of the Diocese of Jamaica and the Cayman Islands as well, because you can see a couple of the symbols that we were speaking about. We've got the crozier, which is this hook-shaped staff, the mitre, the hat of the Archbishop, and in this case, it includes a pineapple, because a pineapple is a kind of a heraldic symbol of Jamaica that is used quite frequently, and also the lion. A lion is usually used as a symbol of the crown, and you can see it as well on the arms of the University of the West Indies. This is a picture of Archbishop Juxon and a short biography of his. So he became Archbishop of London, first of all, in the 1630s, was the first Lord of the Admiralty, then was Lord High Treasurer. And then between the 1640s and 1660, was the English Revolution, and a time when everything changed. The Lambeth Palace was taken away from the property of the Church of England and given to people who are loyal to Oliver Cromwell. And the other thing that's happening in that gap is of course, the invasion of Jamaica in 1655. And by the time the monarch is put back into place, Jamaica is beginning to rise as being one of the most profitable colonies, and in the growing colonial territory of England. These are two other examples of how Archbishop Juxon's coat of arms is used on I think this is a stained glass window in Gloucester Cathedral and in an armorial. And two other examples in a commemorative medal that was issued for him when he was Bishop of London, and again an example of his coat of arms in an armorial that's held at the British Museum. So there are these images of Africans all throughout the use of Archbishop Juxon coat of arms. I myself am descended from Africans enslaved in Jamaica, as I mentioned, and I was fascinated with how all of these images of Africans are really can be found in many different places throughout English history. And I was interested in kind of what they symbolized. Now, this is the Great Hall of Lambeth Palace, which Archbishop Juxon paid to have refurbished after it was destroyed in the English Revolution. And when we go inside the Great Hall at Lambeth Palace, which is where the library is, we can see even more images of Africans. In particular, on either side of the fireplace are these two busts at the top here. And there's a close-up of those two busts, two young African men. And one of the things that I was very interested in is how long have there been Africans and people of African descent living in Lambeth? And that's one of the things I'm going to talk about. But there are even more images of Africans in the Great Hall at Lambeth Palace. In fact, there are dozens. The Great Hall of Lambeth Palace, the architectural style is very unusual because it mixes a more medieval Gothic style with a Baroque architectural style that was becoming popular in the 17th century. So this hammer beam roof, it would have been the first hammer beam roof to have been built in England in hundreds of years, but it's decorated in the Baroque style in this very opulent adornment with swags and fruit and flowers and dozens of images of Africans. So let's take a closer look. So at the top of each of these uprights in the roof of Lambeth Palace, there is depicted an image of an African man. So in each one of these, so how many can we count here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. On both sides, there is an image of an African man. And then if we go even further into the roof, this is a picture that was taken when the Great Hall was refurbished or preserved after it was bombed in World War II. And there are these images of Africans in the frieze between the rafters, and they're alternated with bishops' hats with mitres as well, because it was synonymous. This is supposed to be representative of the symbolism associated with Archbishop Juxon. So they have the bishop's mitre, and again, a symbol that is used over and over again for his family, which are Africans. And then if we look even closer at that very prominent fireplace, we can see again the mitre right smack bang in the middle, and these ornate urns. There's a close-up of them. And if we look even closer at those ornate urns, with all their flowers and fruit. You can see again images of Africans all over. And there is a close-up of that weather vane that I spoke about at the very beginning that I go past every time I walk home, or I'm on the bus on the way home. That weather vane again with Archbishop Juxon's coat of arms and the 4 Africans impaled with the coat of arms of the Archbishop of Canterbury. So, as I said, one of the questions I asked is how long have there been Africans in Lambeth? This month is Black History Month in the UK, and one of the things that there's a lot of focus on always is the post-World War II migration of people of African descent, especially from the Caribbean. But there have been Africans in London for at least 2,000 years, and we have records of Africans in Lambeth going back to the 1600s. So the earliest record, I should say, that we have of somebody who is not English, who is racialized in a different way, being baptized at St. Mary's Church, which is the church next door to Lambeth Palace, is in 1626. And then in the 1669, 1670s, we see more and more people who the parish clerk identifies as being Blackamoor or African being baptized. And this coincides with the rise of African chattel slavery and the expansion of England into the Caribbean and the development of slave societies and colonies in the Caribbean. So this is another image of Archbishop Juxon's coat of arms from a book about heraldry. There are dozens of books about heraldry that were published in the 1600s, and we're going to have a look at a couple of examples of how Africans were depicted in the time. And it's interesting to think about whether the craftsman that created that tortoiseshell comb that Alexis showed us at the beginning, whether he might have been consulting books like this in order to identify the type of coat of arms that he wanted to use on the combs. So I should say as well that it wasn't only, there are many different types of human or man that can be depicted on a coat of arms. We're paying special attention to Africans in this instance. Have a quick look at this one at the top here with the 3 Africans' heads, because we'll be talking about that later. But you could have hands or blood or bones depicted as charges on coats of arms. Here is another example. So one of the things that I was asking myself is, what do the Africans depicted on English coats of arms represent? And I've come up with a few explanations about what they could represent. For some, as is the case of the coats of arms of the families on the top here, it was, or rather, sorry, on the bottom, this yellow coat of arms with the 3 crescent moons and 3 blackamoors. Blackamoors is the name that was given to Africans, and also the name that is still used today in contemporary heraldry for images that are supposed to represent Africans. It could be that the shield represented a person whose name was Blackamoor, or it could be that it represented a connection to the Barbary slave trade, in inverted commas, they're still in use. Blackamoors are still in use throughout heraldry and flags, especially in the Mediterranean. This is an example of the flag of Sardinia. Sardinia is an island, an Italian island in the Mediterranean. And you can see the use of the same flag in the 1500s and its use more recently in 2016. And again, in Corsica, this time a French island in the Mediterranean. And you can see the flag of Corsica displayed in between the Italian and the French flag there. And we need to remember about how close the Mediterranean is to North Africa. And both Corsica and Sardinia were occupied by African Muslim forces in the a couple of millennia ago, and it's thought that the coats of arms may date back to that period. So back to thinking about Jamaica and what's the connection with Jamaica. So we have another example, those 3 blackamoors' heads that I asked you to look out for at the bottom here. This belongs to a man called Samuel Maiko. Samuel Myco in the 1600s was a London merchant and based in London, and Weymouth, a seaside town or a port in the south of England. This is a representation of a kind of contemporary representation of his coats of arms: a yellow shield or a gold shield with 3 blackamoors' heads. And it's used all throughout Weymouth now because he was kind of one of the biggest benefactors today of Weymouth, and he created an endowment that still today is funding the charity that bears his name. And this is 2012, and a group of teenagers who are recipients of a scholarship that bears Samuel Myco's name. Now, the Samuel Myco, his name isn't only born on the scholarship in England, but it's also born on the Myco University College, or Myco College as I used to call it, and of course there's one in Kingston. And that is because the Africans on Samuel Myco's coats of arms were supposed to represent the victory that he had over these African Muslims who were one of the main merchants in the Mediterranean. And he decided when he died, he left a huge amount of his wealth to benefit what I think the terminology at the time was Christians who were being enslaved in the Barbary slave trade. So this is the Christian soldiers and seamen, European Christian soldiers and seamen who were being captured by the African Muslim merchants that were in the Mediterranean. And Samuel Myco's money and in his charity that bore his name and the endowment carried on and still carries on today. In the 1830s, the charity had a new trustee, a man called Thomas Buxton. And Thomas Buxton, if his name sounds familiar, is because he was a notable abolitionist in England, and he decided that instead of the European Christian slaves that Samuel Myco's money was supposed to support, that money could go instead to the Christian enslaved Africans in the Caribbean and towards their education. And that is what established all the Myco colleges all around what was then the British Empire. So the Myco College no longer uses the arms of Samuel Myco, but this is the arms they've now adopted. You can see it has the crocodile. That is a symbol on so much heraldry coming from Jamaica, as is the pineapples. And the open book is oftentimes used on educational coats of arms. You can see it as well on the coat of arms of the University of the West Indies. But again, all over the England, Africans are used in heraldry. Sometimes it represents somebody's name, as I was mentioning. In this case, the name of Sir Thomas More, who was in the court of Henry VIII, King of England, and he would eventually be executed for treason by Henry VIII. Because his name is More, and that is very similar to Blackamoor, his coats of arms often are represented with a African man in the crest there. And he also has moor hens, which are these black birds, again supposed to be a pun on his name, Thomas More. And here's another example of Thomas More's arms, this time in London. The previous example was in Canada. This time in London, on the above the door, just here, of the Church of our Most Holy Redeemer, St. Thomas More, and that is because Thomas More is recognised as a martyr and a saint in the Catholic Church, again featuring an African there. And other reasons why Africans could be using coats of arms is because if it's a particular person, and in this case, in the coat of arms of the Worshipful Company of Needlemakers, which is a type of guild, a kind of tradesman's union, or a medieval version of a tradesman's union. The coat of arms represents, or the crest of an African represents a particular person. And that is the person who bought needle making, which at the time in the 1500s was a very secretive art and craft. It was an African who brought needle making to England. And he was an African who came most likely from Spain. You can see here a description of him and his craft written by Thomas Fuller in the 1660s, saying that the first needles The Spanish needles made in England were made by a Negro in Cheapside. Cheapside is a street in the middle of the city of London and not too far from the Bank of England. Another example on a guild, this time the Worshipful Company of Brewers who make beer. We have another depiction, this time of an African woman. And that is because the Worshipful Company of Brewers has a relationship to another saint, St. Thomas Becket, who is one of the patron saints of London. And there is a legend around St. Thomas Becket, and that is his mother was a Saracen maid. So that means that his mother was a Muslim woman from Africa. Or from the Middle East, and she is most often depicted as having dark skin. And this is a kind of contemporary 20th or 21st century depiction of St. Thomas of Becket's mum with her dark skin. This is the arms of the city of Southampton, which is a port city in the south of England. This version, the version on the left, is from the 1890s, and the version of the right is only from 15 or 20 years later. And you can see on the left it is an African or a dark-skinned indigenous person that's depicted, of course, because ports in England were where all of the trade and produce that was produced by enslaved Africans from the Americas, from the New World, was coming in. Oftentimes ports, their heraldry had a connection to symbolism associated with enslavement and with colonization. But by the 20th century, the figure in the crest of the port of Southampton had been somewhat lightened. And that brings us into another reason why Africans are depicted on coats of arms, and that is to do with enslavement. In this case, this is a coat of arms of Fanal Gomes de Mina, who was a Portuguese merchant. And it was this Portuguese merchant that established the African trade and also established the enslavement of Africans and chattel slavery, which first started in Europe before it went to eventually went to the Caribbean. In this coat of arms dates back to the 1470s, and you can see without a doubt there that he's depicting the riches that were available from the West African coast. So the riches are gold and also human cargo as well. And he was given the name Fanal Gomes de Mina. De Mina means of the mines because of the gold mines. And it's important to remember that the gold mines of West Africa that produced so much gold for Europe, there were also Africans enslaved in the mining of the gold and other minerals, even in the 1500s. And for those of you familiar with the Fanti Coast or the Gold Coast, which of course today is Ghana, and Elmina Castle. Elmina Castle comes from, again, this connection to this idea of mines being in the Gold Coast. And indeed, the name Gold Coast itself links to that. This is probably the most famous depiction of enslaved Africans on coats of arms, on English coats of arms. These are the coats of arms of the man who made the trading of Africans a royal business. And he is John Hawkins, privateer, pirate John Hawkins, who, along with his cousin, Francis Drake, set out on some of the first expeditions to capture enslaved Africans who were being transported across the Atlantic as human cargo by Spanish and Portuguese ships. And they made quite a lucrative business out of that. And in appreciation, I guess, of his work, the Queen, who at the time was Elizabeth, Queen Elizabeth I, awarded him with a coat of arms. In this case, again, featuring a captive African in the crest of his coat of arms. Another famous coat of arms that features humans' heads that is associated with colonialism, this time not Africans, but Turkish people, is a coat of arms of John Smith. John Smith was the colonizer who colonized Virginia. And this is his coat of arms here. And we can see it again at the bottom of this map. And coat of arms are used extensively throughout cartography, throughout the development of maps, as Europeans were beginning to to record the territories that they were colonizing in the Caribbean and, of course, in North America. And people put their coat of arms on because that is the symbol of property. Now, one thing that did intrigue me with the coat of arms of Archbishop Juxon was the Juxon's family connection to sugar. And that is because the family of Archbishop William Juxon were sugar bakers. Sugar baking is the act of refining sugar that came after sugar was initially processed in the cane fields. And it's important to point out, one of the things that puzzled me, I guess, was how could Archbishop Juxon, whose coat of arms were granted in the 1630s, what connection does he and his family have to the establishment of sugar in the English slave colonies in Barbados and then in Jamaica? Because this was 10 years before Archbishop Juxon's coat of arms was 10 years before the English colonies began to create sugar. And that is because it's important. What became clear is to recognize how important the sugar plantations in Europe were before that skill and that technology was transported over to the New World. Firstly, to Brazil, and then to Hispaniola, to Puerto Rico, to Jamaica, and to Barbados. This is an image of a sugar factory in Sicily, and it's kind of a romanticized image. We can see in the top here people cutting cane and the various processes that sugar cane goes through in order to create these cones of sugar. So we're seeing the whole process here, but this process wouldn't have all taken place in the same territory, even on the same continent. The cutting of the cane and that first refining would have been close to the cane fields, and then the final refinement would have usually taken place in Europe. And the development of sugar cultivation moved east across the world with time. So in the Middle Ages, it was in the Mediterranean, and then through to the islands of the Atlantic, especially Madeira and Cape Verde, and then of course over to the European colonies in the New World. And it's important to remember as well that Christopher Columbus's family were involved in the sugarcane cultivation in Cape Verde, and it was Christopher Columbus himself that first introduced sugarcane as a potential commodity and product crop in the New World. Sugar first came to the slave plantations in Brazil. At that time, Brazil was a Dutch and a Portuguese colony, and with the importation of sugar as a crop came the importation of racialized slavery as well, because sugar is a very labor-intensive crop. And a company, another merchant company established in the 1670s, the Royal Africa Company, soon got into the business of supplying the enslaved labor in order to run these European cane plantations. So slavery and plantations met first in Europe, where Africans were enslaved in the production of sugar in Portugal, in Sardinia. And then that practice was imported to the Atlantic Islands, to Madeira, to Cape Verde, and eventually that was imported to the New World. And the Royal Africa Company was established, first of all, to trade in goods coming from Africa, in ivory, or elephant's teeth as it's called, or in wax, and also in gold. And eventually they got into and had an exclusive monopoly on the trading in Africans. And it's estimated that around 212,000 people were traded by the Royal Africa Company while it had its monopoly. And this is the coat of arms of the Royal Africa Company, depicting on it symbols that are associated with the African trade, in inverted commas. So we have two Africans here as supporters, an elephant, because ivory was another important product. And then we have in the canton here symbols of the British royal family, and that is because the British royal family were some of the key and main shareholders in the Royal Africa Company, in this slave trading company. And the enslavement of Africans wasn't a new endeavor. for the British royal family. We have in here a couple of pictures, Queen Anne of Denmark, who was the queen to James I, King Charles, her child, and his wife. And we can see the African servants they had almost in the background. It's almost as though the animals in the pictures are more depicted in a more humane way than the Africans themselves, who are kind of just almost treated like a luxury item in portraiture from this period. And here's a couple of examples of the next generation, so to speak, and both Prince Rupert of the Rhine and his cousin Charles II were some of the key shareholders in the Royal Africa Company. So we can see Prince Rupert, who was in the colonizing forces both in the Caribbean and in West Africa, with a very paternalistic hand on the head of this child, who is adorned in more symbols of luxury and of the products of the efforts of both enslaved Africans and enslaved indigenous people, which is pearls. And on the right hand side is not a painting this time, but an embroidery celebrating the wedding of King Charles II and his queen Catherine of Braganza, Portuguese princess. And again, we can see an African attendant with King Charles. And it wasn't only the royalist side of things. To remember, this is all happening in the midst of a war between people that were loyal to the king and people that were loyal to Parliament in England, but also Oliver Cromwell, who commanded the invading forces in Jamaica, also had Africans, most likely enslaved Africans, in his retinue, in his circle as his servant. We can see here a young man who's depicted as a groom. So one of the things that I was asking is that we've seen a little bit how Africans are depicted, but how are indigenous people and why are indigenous people depicted so much on colonial heraldry, like the coat of arms of Jamaica? And these are two early examples of depictions of indigenous people that predate the coat of arms of Jamaica. The coat of arms of Jamaica was granted in 1661, but in 1507 we can see this coat of arms of the royal family of Portugal, with two indigenous people, in this case Brazil, being depicted on a letter sent from the King of Portugal. You can see the stance is very similar to what would then in 150 years time be used in the coat of arms of Jamaica. And then in the 1630s, again, this time depicting America, who is this figure here, sat on an abundance of food and fruit and produce from America, holding a parrot with a feathered cape and a feathered headdress on. And again, two indigenous people depicted, and this rather elongated crocodile. You have to imagine that the person who is drawing this has never seen a crocodile before. So already you can see, let's see if we can spot a pineapple. That might be a pineapple there. So already you can see the symbols that we associate with the coat of arms of Jamaica are being used quite early on to represent European colonies. Now, the coat of arms of Jamaica make up a kind of trio of coat of arms, the earliest coat of arms of English colonies in the Americas. First, in 1625, came the coat of arms of Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia, of course, means New Scotland, and on the shield is depicted a St Andrew's cross, very similar to the flag of Jamaica, because that is his inspiration. But in this case, the inspiration for the St Andrew's cross is the flag of Scotland, which of course is a white cross on a blue background, and that's been inverted here, and it has the red lion of Scotland, which is an emblem of the Scottish monarchy. And then on the coat of arms of Newfoundland, and both Nova Scotia and Newfoundland are in Canada, we can see indigenous people depicted again with the symbolism of the royal family, of the monarchy of what would become the United Kingdom, the unicorn and the lion, brute force and magic, as a friend of mine put the other day. And this is one of the earliest representations of the coat of arms of Jamaica, which is down here on an etching of a seal, and with the original motto, which my Latin is going to be very bad, Indus erquit servet uni, which means both Indies will serve one Lord, of course referring to the West Indies and the East Indies in Asia, where England had colonies. And you can see on the other side of the seal, you have Charles I depicted with an indigenous person kneeling, presenting Charles I with the abundance, the fruit, the produce of the colonies. And then an example of the comb that Alexis so generously showed us earlier on. In this case, this example is in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and it's made of tortoiseshell, but of course tortoiseshell is from a turtle, the hawkbill turtle, which is native to the Caribbean. And these combs, there are a few, there are around, I think, 6 or 8 examples of these combs that are in collections, both in the Caribbean. I think the National Museum of Jamaica has the largest collection, as well as in the US and in England. Tortoiseshell was a luxury product at that time, and these were really not only souvenirs, but they were kind of the height of luxury, depicting this new colony with all of these new exotic plant life and animals and people. And these the combs would have been brought to England or brought to the colonies in North America as luxury items. And it's likely that the tortoiseshell, or that the turtle from which this comb came from, were likely captured by indigenous people of the Caribbean and also enslaved Africans, because one of the key skills that they were wanted for was their swimming skills, and it takes considerable swimming and diving skills in order to hunt turtles, especially hawkbill turtles. And we can see again the same imagery being used on the colonial heraldry, this time of the Company of Scotland trading to Africa and the Indies, who set off on their own colonial endeavour in the 1690s when they tried to colonise a place called Darien, the Darien colonies, which is now in Guyana. You can see indigenous people and African people are being used as supporters, and the white cross on the blue background of St Andrews, which represents Scotland. So we spoke a little bit about tortoiseshell as a luxury product, and sugar, which was another luxury product coming from the Caribbean. Another key luxury product, which they tried to grow in the Caribbean, but eventually would become used in North America, was tobacco. And Africans are used in tobacco, in advertising in tobacco, from the very beginning. This is an image, a bookplate from 1617. And you can see Africans are being used to advertise tobacco. This is the earliest print that we have of a kind of advertising tobacco. And we can see this African man is being used here, smoking a pipe, and these two figures running away and swimming, again, because Africans and swimming or aquatic life is something that is very much interconnected. And I'll just read you what Captain Pipe and Captain Snuff are saying. Again, my Latin, forgive me. Qui colla albis erat, quantum multis abilo anglis in Ethiopium. And that translates as how much was the English whose colour was white transformed to an Ethiopian. So this is the idea that by smoking tobacco, by smoking the produce from, or the product of the New World, you could become African. Ethiopian was a term that was used to describe anybody of dark skin from Africa in that period. So we've got a close-up of the gentleman here smoking his pipe, again depicting as a blackamoor. And you can see that all over this kind of early illustrations depicting tobacco. In this case, this is another bookplate depicting a coffee house in London. We've got tobacco here, which I grew up calling this a jackass rope, but this is a rope of tobacco. A coffee pot, an African here pouring the coffee, a Turkish man, we can tell from his turban, and all these people indulging, partaking in these luxury products. And we've even got coat of arms up here at the top, and this is a closer look at the coat of arms. Again, of a dark-skinned African man with smoking 2 pipes. And this is used even earlier in the 1600s as the arms of the tobacconists. So this is very much interconnected: tobacco, sugar, tortoiseshell, and any luxury products from the Caribbean that is being brought over to England and to Europe, full stop, are depicted and advertised by images of Africans and indigenous people. And sometimes the symbolism of those images gets mixed up. So here are two examples a bit later on in the 1700s of tobacco paper adverts. And they're still, even 100 years later, using images of Africans and indigenous Caribbeans to portray tobacco. And this is a closer up of Nicatiana and the swimmers there who were frolicking on the banks of the river, and an image of what was also called the Pearl Coast, and that is the Caribbean Sea on the coast of Venezuela, especially, and Colombia, where the islands were especially fruitful in the hunting of pearls. And pearls were another luxury item in Europe, as I mentioned, where Africans were enslaved in the hunting and the capturing of pearls because of their prowess as divers and as swimmers. This pendant here with this small pearl brooch is the Drake's jewel. This is Sir Francis Drake here, cousin of John Hawksmoor, who I mentioned before was, he and Hawksmoor were some of the original English slave traders. And Drake was given this jewel in the 1590s as a present from Queen Elizabeth I. And you can see on here, you have an African's head depicted again, and he wears it very proudly around his girdle in that portrait. And one of the things Elizabeth I was promised by Drake and Hawkins was an abundance of pearls. Pearls were a symbolism of maritime power. You can see this image of her. She's draped in pearls that most likely came from the Caribbean. Pearls and tortoiseshell, as we spoke about, are luxury products from the sea. And this is a cabinet of curiosities with other luxuries from the sea, but also from Africa. This white cup with this intricately carved white cup, and this cup here, most likely made from ivory. The pearls, the shells, all coming from the sea. The coral, again, coming from the sea. And if we look extra close, we can see that Africans here are depicted, as well as the image of the King of Denmark. The King of Denmark at the time owned a number of slave castles in West Africa on the Gold Coast. It's important to remember that, as I spoke earlier, coats of arms were used as symbols of property and of territory. And Africans' bodies, the bodies of enslaved Africans, were also included in that marking, in that branding, quite literally in branding sometimes, but also in the on the padlocks of slave collars that oftentimes, especially in London, that enslaved Africans had to wear. In this case, this is a portrait of Elihu Yale. Yale University bears his name, and a young child that he enslaved wearing a silver collar. This is a rather shocking image that was on display at a museum in London earlier on this year, a portrait of the Duchess of Manzini, with her dogs and also the children that she enslaved. You can see both the dogs and the enslaved children are all wearing collars. And even in the branding, branding enslaved people's bodies also could feature coats of arms. The Royal Africa Company that I spoke about earlier, Africans who were traded or owned by the Royal Africa Company were either branded with the initials RAC, or with the standing for the Royal African Company, or with the letters DOY standing for the Duke of York, who was the governor of the Royal Africa Company. And there are records in Haiti that mention that some Africans who had been traded so much, their bodies resembled the obelisks of Egypt. They had so many markings and branding on them to trace their provenance, who had owned them and when. So coats of arms are also used in this way to restrict and to put a mark of ownership on the bodies of Africans themselves. I want to switch up to kind of what we're thinking about and think about how symbols of family, and of identity are used by Africans. In this case, we're talking about Adinkra symbols in Ghana. Adinkra is a system of symbolism that is used to depict things of different meanings. I guess the one that we, or that I am most familiar with is the symbol of Sankofa, which is just here, actually. That's lucky. The Sankofa symbol of a bird looking back is often used to represent that we need to look back in order to look forward, and that is a symbol that's actually used throughout the African diaspora. But Adinkra are especially used in Ghana to make fabric, and this is one of the earliest examples of Adinkra fabric in Europe. In this case, this was a fabric sent from Elmina Fort, which was originally created as a Portuguese slave fort in the Gold Coast, to the King of the Netherlands. And you can see in the center there is a coat of arms of the King of the Netherlands, and then all around it is surrounded by different types of Adinkra symbols. And this is a very early example of Adinkra cloth. And then also in Ghana itself, there is a new form of Adinkra cloth. Ghana textiles, we are most familiar with kente cloth. This is a style of cloth, the Obama kente, that was created for the visit of President Obama in 2012. And here it is being worn by the President of Ghana at his inauguration. And then to think about symbols of heraldry that are used by African descendants today in the 21st century, many people choose symbols that represent their identity. And we're going to have a look at a few of those examples now. This is the coat of arms of a young man who's training to be a priest, and he wanted to use an Adinkra symbol, which is these two diamond shapes here at the bottom, which is called an epa, which is supposed to represent a handcuff and enslavement, or that's where the imagery comes from, and that is because we know that because handcuff shackles were not present in West Africa before the oncoming of European chattel slavery. The horseshoes he chose relate to his family's name. This is the coat of arms of the Black Loyalist Heritage Society in Canada. If the colours are familiar, they chose those colours, red, green, and black, because they're so much associated with Pan-Africanism and, of course, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, Marcus Garvey's association. The lions there are supposed to represent Africa. Black loyalists were formerly enslaved Africans who fought along the side of the British in the American War of Independence and were promised their freedom as a result. And a number of them were taken to Nova Scotia, where there's been a community ever since then, ever since the 1770s. And of course, Jamaican Maroons were also transported to Nova Scotia as well during that period. This is Mayanne Elizabeth Francis, who was the 31st Lieutenant General of Nova Scotia, again in Canada. Canada has its own heraldic authority, so a government body that awards heraldry or grants heraldry to people, and they have some excellent examples. In this case, Miss Francis is of, I think she is of Cuban and Antiguan descent, which is why they feature in the middle of her shield sugarcane, because she's wanting to represent the symbolism of her family's background in the Caribbean. And this is her cat here. She chose her cat in the crest. Now, this is an example of somebody who might be more familiar to some of you, Alexander Bustamante, the first Prime Minister of Jamaica. And he has chosen on his shield, this is a parliamentary mace meant to be representative of his time as a member of parliament and eventually as Prime Minister of Jamaica, and two cane knives, two cutlasses as well, both a weapon and a tool that people in Jamaica are so familiar with. And of course, he has a doctor bird as well in his crest. Now, they say this is a fighting bull, a Spanish fighting bull, supposed to be representative of his Spanish ancestry or his fondness for Spanish culture. But to me, that looks like a Jamaican black cow, the breed of cattle that was established by T.P. Lecky. So I need to look a bit more into that to see if that is in fact a Jamaican black and not or even a Jamaican Hope cattle breed and not a Spanish fighting bull. Pearl Duncan is a journalist based in New York, and she was one of the pioneers, actually, of DNA family history analysis. The idea that you can use your DNA to find out your ancestry. And she was one of the first people to do that. She is of Jamaican descent. As I said, she's a journalist who lives in New York. So how is her Jamaican ancestry represented? She has lignum vitae flowers on her shield, as well as these 3 ink pots representing her trade as a journalist. Now, finally, this is probably my favourite coat of arms that we're going to see today. This belongs to the woman on the right-hand side here, Michelle Jean, who was the Governor General in Canada, and she is of Haitian ancestry. And she shows a number of symbols associated with the Caribbean. So on her black shield, which features a sand dollar, a type of aquatic beast, so to speak, found in the Caribbean Sea, which is an important symbol for her and her family. The crown here represents the monarchy and her boss, so to speak, since the Queen in Canada is Queen Elizabeth II. The Simbi, or mermaids, are a Haitian symbol that is very much, I guess, part of the mythology of water creatures that is throughout the Caribbean, and people that are descended from those who survived the Middle Passage. And then she has a conch shell and broken chains. And of course, conch shells and broken chains are a symbol not only of freedom, but of the fight for African people and African descended people in the Caribbean had for their freedom. And we can see it represented here at the bottom in this statue that is so reminiscent of the celebration of liberty in Haiti, the Maroon Inconnu statue of a self-liberated African blowing a conch shell, hopefully to arouse others in their fight for liberty. And of course, the broken chains, which oftentimes symbolize freedom. So thank you. There is some further reading for anybody else who's particularly interested in heraldry. There are some excellent articles, both by Patricia Mohammed, who is a lecturer at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine in Trinidad, and an article specifically on Jamaican heraldry as well by Duncan Sutherland, that if you're interested to know more, you can find out. But thank you so much, as we've taken this very rapid look through how not only Africans have been depicted on English heraldry, but also how Indigenous people have been depicted on colonial heraldry in the Caribbean. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for that wonderful presentation. I'm going to switch over to YouTube to see if we have any questions from our viewers.
Okay, great.
But if not, in the meantime, while people are thinking about their questions, I just want to say a quick thank you again to Kelly Foster. Please, everyone, follow her. Kelly, you can give people your
sure, my
please.
details. Yeah, so I'm on almost all of the social media, but Twitter and Instagram anyway, at London Labrish. So I was having a Louise Bennett moment when I chose that handle. So so at London Labrish.
Thank you for that. And if you guys can please follow National Museum Jamaica, Institute of Jamaica, and National Museum West on all our social media platforms, that will be really appreciated. And I just want to say a thank you to our director, Dr. Jonathan Greenland, our technical guru, Ruel Cook, who is behind the lens, Sharifa Balfour, Stephanie Rose, the collection unit here at National Museum Jamaica, who graciously lent us, all of these beautiful artifacts. I just wanted to show one last time the comb cases and to show as the size difference. I know the glare, and another time we will have a lecture probably dedicated solely about these tortoiseshell cases and combs. Because as Kelly mentioned in the presentation, National Museum Jamaica has the largest collection, as well as some of the earliest examples. Because we even have an example here from 1673, which is probably the oldest tortoiseshell comb case in the Western
And
Hemisphere.
I should say, Alexis, I think you mentioned that one of them has Port Royal written on the top. They stopped being produced,
Yes.
unsurprisingly, when the earthquake happens. So it's likely that they were just produced by one or two craftsmen who knew how to use tortoiseshell and do the carving.
This is the one Kelly is talking about, viewers, that says Port Royal on it. Again, sorry with the glare. So we want to thank everyone here at National Museum Jamaica who helps facilitate this talk. As I carefully, gingerly put up the tortoiseshell cases. I mean, they've been preserved for hundreds of years.
Yeah, they're only 400 years old.
You know, only 400 years, guys. And based on the condition, you guys could maybe tell that they were basically not used. They were just decorative. So again, I have gingerly put them back over to the side.
And we should say, actually, with the combs, you know, they are produced for European hair. These are not, which in a lot of the things that I've read about the combs, it doesn't stress who they're for. They are very fine tooth combs.
Let me try to take out one. Can you guys see? This is one. Sorry, I'm trying to center it properly.
And I should say as well that on the labels that I've seen in the museums in London that have examples of the combs, they've misidentified most of the plants as well.
Well, what my research showed is that this might have been for a wig. But yeah, they're so, I mean, guys, this is so delicate.
Through my hair.
Yeah, this would break. I mean, come on. So that's why they're in such pristine condition. All right, so let me check. Well, we don't have any questions currently. So I guess we'll just wrap up again and say thanks for everyone who tuned in. Thank you again, Kelly. Anyone who has any further questions after we've signed off, please feel free to contact us or direct message us. And please follow us on social media. Follow Kelly on social media. And we'll be having some other fantastic lectures and events on social media to come. Oh, and tomorrow, before I totally forget, before someone get vexed with me, Institute of Jamaica is having Heritage Fest. So tune into the Institute of Jamaica's YouTube page at 10 o'clock tomorrow. So thanks again, Kelly, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Stay safe, everybody.
All right, guys, stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.